The long drive home. It was a crisp fall afternoon, and I was driving back home to Portland from a business trip in Seattle. The I-5 was my usual route, stretching through the dense fir forests and rolling hills of the Pacific Northwest. I've always found these drives therapeutic, the hum of the car blending with my favorite playlists. With the sun beginning to set behind the trees, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, everything seemed perfectly normal. I was thinking about the weekend ahead, planning to catch up on some much-needed rest and maybe a Seahawks game. My stomach growled, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since breakfast, but the familiarity of the road lulled me into a false sense of security. As I continued driving, the sky darkened rapidly, the earlier vibrant colors swallowed by an ominous gray. Rain began to pour down in sheets, the kind of sudden Pacific Northwest storm that always seems to come out of nowhere. The windshield wipers worked furiously, but visibility was poor, forcing me to slow down. Traffic thinned out, with only a few cars braving the worsening weather. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel, a sense of unease creeping in as I drove cautiously through the curtain of rain. Despite the storm, I pressed on, eager to reach the comfort of home. About 20 minutes into the storm, my headlights caught sight of something unusual. A figure standing by the roadside, drenched and waving for help. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about stopping, but something about this figure felt off. It was an isolated stretch of road, and the person's clothes seemed ragged, their face obscured by the rain. Against my better judgment, I decided to pull over, rolling down the window just enough to hear them over the pounding rain. They claimed their car had broken down a mile back and asked for a ride to the nearest gas station. Despite the discomfort gnawing at me, I agreed, unlocking the passenger door. The stranger climbed in, bringing with them a gust of cold air and the sharp scent of wet clothing. As they settled into the seat, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that clung to the air inside the car. The person didn't say much, just a curt thanks before falling silent, their gaze fixed ahead. I tried to make small talk to ease the tension, asking where they were headed and how long they'd been stuck on the road, but their responses were brief and evasive. The only sound was the rhythmic thud of rain against the car, a soundtrack to the growing sense of dread that had settled over me. We drove in silence for what felt like an eternity until we reached a gas station, its neon sign flickering weakly in the downpour. It was one of those old, isolated places you might see in a horror movie, with a single pump and a convenience store that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. The station was deserted, save for the attendant inside who barely glanced up as we parked. My passenger muttered something about making a call and quickly disappeared into the store, leaving me alone in the car. I sat there, staring through the rain-streaked windshield, feeling an inexplicable urge to leave. Minutes passed, and the stranger didn't return. I watched the rain splatter on the asphalt, each drop echoing the pounding of my heart. I kept glancing towards the convenience store, expecting to see them emerge, but there was no sign of them. The gas station felt like a ghost town, the flickering lights casting long shadows across the empty lot. My phone buzzed with a low battery warning, and I realized I hadn't charged it all day. A sense of urgency began to build inside me. Something wasn't right, and every instinct screamed at me to get back on the road. I decided to head inside the store, hoping to find the stranger and put my unease to rest. As I stepped through the door, a bell chimed above me, drawing the attention of the lone attendant behind the counter. The air inside was stale, and the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting an eerie glow. I glanced around the cramped aisles, filled with the typical array of snacks and travel essentials, but there was no sign of the person I'd given a ride. When I asked the attendant if they'd seen anyone come in, they shook their head, a puzzled look on their face. The stranger had vanished. Feeling more uneasy by the second, I rushed back to my car, my mind racing with questions. As I approached, I noticed something that made my blood run cold, a piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper, flapping in the wind. I grabbed it and unfolded it, revealing a hastily scrawled message. "Get out. They're watching." My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly scanned the area, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But the gas station remained eerily still, the storm masking any sounds that might have betrayed another presence. Panic gripped me as I jumped back into the driver's seat, locking the doors with trembling fingers. The rain was relentless, and I could barely see a few feet ahead, but I didn't care. I had to leave that place. I started the engine and peeled out of the lot, the tires skidding on the slick pavement. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion, the note burning a hole in my pocket. I had no idea who had left it or what they meant, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out. I pushed the car faster, each mile taking me further from that gas station and whatever danger lurked there. The storm showed no sign of letting up, and the road seemed to stretch endlessly before me. My phone was almost dead, and I cursed myself for not charging it earlier. As I fumbled with the charger, the car suddenly lurched to one side, and I realized with horror that I'd hit something, a deer perhaps, that had strayed onto the highway. The impact sent the car skidding, and I fought to regain control, heart pounding in my chest. When I finally brought it to a stop, I was shaking, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The road was empty, no sign of what I'd hit, but I knew I couldn't stay there. With a deep breath, I restarted the engine, hoping the car was still drivable. As I did, my eyes caught sight of something in the rearview mirror, a figure standing by the roadside, watching me. My blood ran cold as I realized it was the same stranger I'd picked up earlier, now silhouetted against the storm. Panic surged through me, and I floored the accelerator, desperate to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever was happening. The figure receded into the darkness, but the fear lingered, clawing at the edges of my mind. The drive felt endless, every shadow and sound amplifying my fear. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if unseen eyes followed my every move. Finally, I saw the welcoming lights of Portland on the horizon, a beacon of safety after the night's ordeal. I exited the highway, my heart gradually slowing as I navigated the familiar streets. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a long moment, trying to steady my nerves. I glanced at the rearview mirror one last time, half expecting to see the stranger, but there was nothing. Just the quiet of the night and the soft patter of rain. Even now, weeks later, the events of that night haunt me. I've replayed every moment, searching for answers that never come. The note, the stranger, the sense of being hunted. It all lingers at the edges of my mind. I've taken different routes since then, avoiding that stretch of highway and that desolate gas station. But every so often, when the rain falls hard and the wind howls through the trees, I find myself glancing over my shoulder, wondering if I'll see that figure again. It's a fear that clings to me, a reminder that sometimes the real horror isn't what we see, but what we can't explain. The night shift nightmare. I've been working the graveyard shift at Pete's Gas & Go on the outskirts of Duluth, Minnesota for about 6 months now. It's a typical 24-hour convenience store attached to a small gas station, nestled along Interstate 35. Most nights are uneventful, just your usual mix of truckers, insomniacs, and the occasional drunk college kid from UMD looking for snacks. I'm used to the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights and the soft drone of the coolers. But last Tuesday night, everything changed. What started as a normal shift turned into the most terrifying experience of my life, leaving me questioning everything I thought I knew about the seemingly ordinary people around us. The night began like any other. I clocked in at 11 p.m., relieving my coworker Jake with our usual banter about the Twins' latest game. As I settled in behind the counter, I noticed our regular Mr. Thompson pull up in his beat-up Ford pickup. He came in every Tuesday and Thursday around midnight, always buying the same things: a large black coffee, a pack of Marlboros, and a copy of the Duluth News-Tribune. I'd grown accustomed to his quiet demeanor and polite small talk about the weather. But tonight, something felt off. As he approached the counter, I noticed his usually neat appearance was disheveled, his eyes darting nervously around the store. Mr. Thompson's hands shook as he placed his items on the counter. I tried to make conversation, asking about the unseasonably cold weather we'd been having, but he barely responded. As I rang up his purchase, I noticed dark stains on the cuffs of his flannel shirt. My mind immediately went to the worst. Was that blood? I tried to shake off the thought, telling myself it was probably just oil from working on his truck. But as he fumbled with his wallet, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. A crumpled piece of paper with what looked like a list of names, some of which had been crossed out. My heart began to race as I handed Mr. Thompson his change. He mumbled a thank you and hurried out of the store, leaving me with a sense of dread I couldn't shake. I watched through the large windows as he got into his truck, but instead of driving away, he just sat there, staring blankly ahead. Minutes ticked by, and still, he didn't move. The empty parking lot suddenly felt exposed and dangerous. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That a regular customer was acting weird? I tried to focus on restocking the shelves, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the truck. Around 2 a.m., I was startled by the chime of the door. A young woman rushed in, her eyes wild with fear. She looked to be in her early 20s, probably a student from the nearby University of Minnesota Duluth. "Please," she gasped. "I need help. Someone's following me." I ushered her behind the counter, my own fear mixing with a surge of protective instinct. As I reached for the phone to call 911, I glanced out the window and froze. Mr. Thompson's truck was gone, but now a dark SUV with tinted windows was slowly cruising through the parking lot. The woman, who introduced herself as Emily, was shaking uncontrollably. Between sobs, she told me she had been at a party near campus when she noticed a man watching her. She left early, but he followed her in his truck. She had been running through the woods near the highway, desperately trying to lose him. As she spoke, I couldn't help but think of Mr. Thompson and the list I had seen. Was it possible? The SUV circled the lot once more before parking directly in front of the store. My palms were sweating as I gripped the phone, ready to dial at a moment's notice. Suddenly, the SUV's headlights flashed twice. Emily let out a whimper, shrinking further behind the counter. "That's him," she whispered. "He's found me." I tried to steady my breathing as I watched the driver's door open. To my horror, Mr. Thompson stepped out, his face eerily calm in the harsh glow of the parking lot lights. He walked towards the store with purposeful steps, his eyes locked on the entrance. I knew I had to act fast. I quickly locked the front door and pulled down the security gate, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the controls. Mr. Thompson reached the door just as the gate clanged shut. He stood there, staring at us through the metal bars, his face a mask of cold determination. "Open up," he called, his voice chillingly calm. "I just want to talk to the girl." Emily was sobbing quietly behind me as I finally managed to dial 911. As I frantically explained the situation to the dispatcher, Mr. Thompson began to shake the gate violently. The metal rattled ominously, and I feared it wouldn't hold for long. I grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her towards the back of the store, desperately searching for a way out. We burst through the rear exit into the chilly Minnesota night. The woods behind the store loomed dark and forbidding, but it was our only option. As we ran, I could hear the sound of metal giving way, and Mr. Thompson's heavy footsteps not far behind. The forest was dense, branches whipping at our faces as we stumbled through the underbrush. Emily stumbled, twisting her ankle on a hidden root. I helped her up, supporting her weight as we pushed on. The sound of pursuit grew closer, and panic threatened to overwhelm me. Just as I thought we couldn't go on, the trees thinned, revealing a small cabin. A light shone through the window, a beacon of hope in the darkness. We stumbled towards it, praying for salvation. As we reached the porch, the door flew open. An older man stood there, a shotgun in his hands. "Get inside, quick!" he barked. We didn't hesitate, diving through the doorway as he slammed it shut behind us. The man introduced himself as Bill, a retired park ranger who lived off the grid. He had heard our approach and suspected trouble. As Bill barricaded the door, Emily and I huddled by the fireplace, trying to catch our breath. Suddenly, Emily gasped, pointing to a corkboard on the wall. Pinned there were several missing person flyers, all young women who had disappeared from the Duluth area over the past year. With growing horror, I realized they matched the names I had seen on Mr. Thompson's list. Bill's face grew grim as we explained what had happened. "I've been tracking these disappearances for months," he said. "I suspected someone local, but I never imagined." A heavy silence fell over the cabin as the implications sank in. Mr. Thompson, the quiet regular I had served for months, was a predator hiding in plain sight. The peaceful community I thought I knew had been harboring a monster. As we waited for the police to arrive, huddled in the safety of Bill's cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that our ordeal was far from over. The woods outside seemed to press in on us, full of shadows and secrets. I knew that even if we made it through the night, the terror of this experience would stay with me forever. A stark reminder that sometimes the most frightening monsters are the ones wearing a familiar face. The Midnight Visitor. It was a crisp autumn evening in my quiet suburb outside of Minneapolis, Minnesota. The leaves had turned a brilliant orange and red, and the neighborhood was bathed in a soft, golden glow from the street lamps. I had just returned home from a long day at work at a local tech company, where the most excitement I'd had was debugging a particularly stubborn piece of code. After a quick dinner, I settled into my favorite armchair, ready to enjoy a peaceful night. My only company was the soft hum of my cat Whiskers, curled up beside me. Everything seemed calm and ordinary. Just as I was starting to drift into the pages of a mystery novel, the sudden, sharp knock on my front door jolted me from my relaxation. It was nearly 11 p.m., an hour when the quiet of the neighborhood was almost sacred. I glanced at the clock, wondering who could possibly be visiting at this hour. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I hadn't seen any cars parked outside. Hesitantly, I put my book down and approached the door, peeking through the peephole. Through the peephole, I saw a tall, shadowy figure standing on my doorstep. The person was dressed in a long coat that obscured their face, making it hard to discern any features. I felt a chill run down my spine, a sensation I tried to shake off as I reminded myself that it could be a lost neighbor or someone in need of help. I called out, "Hello? Can I help you?" but received no response. The figure remained still, their presence unsettling. Deciding to open the door slightly, I asked again, "Can I help you?" The figure finally spoke in a low, almost muffled voice. "I need to use your phone. Mine's dead, and I can't find my way." I hesitated, my instincts warning me that something was off. Despite my apprehensions, I thought it might be a genuine request and reluctantly agreed. But I kept the door mostly closed, only cracking it open enough to slip the phone through. I handed the phone to the figure, who quickly stepped back into the shadows. I watched through the gap in the door as they dialed a number. The conversation was hushed and indistinct, and I couldn't make out any words. The figure seemed increasingly agitated, their posture rigid and their movements hurried. The eerie silence of the night made their soft murmurs even more unsettling. After a few minutes, the figure ended the call and returned the phone to me, their hand brushing mine in a way that sent shivers down my spine. They muttered a quick, "Thank you," and turned to leave, walking briskly down the driveway and disappearing into the darkness. I locked the door immediately, feeling a wave of unease wash over me. I tried to shake it off, blaming it on the late hour and my overactive imagination. As I sat back down, I noticed something odd on the floor where the figure had stood. A small, crumpled piece of paper lay near the door. Curiosity got the better of me, and I picked it up, unfolding it carefully. The note was hastily written, with a message that read, "They're watching. Don't trust anyone." My heart raced as I read and reread the note, the words echoing ominously in my mind. My anxiety grew as I began to check all the windows and doors, making sure everything was secure. As I moved from room to room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I searched the house thoroughly, but found nothing out of place. Just as I was about to settle down again, I heard a faint, scraping sound coming from the attic. A sound I had never heard before. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed a flashlight and a baseball bat, the only thing I could think of for protection. Slowly, I made my way to the attic door, which was tucked away in a closet. The sound continued intermittently, a dragging noise that seemed to come closer with every step I took. I hesitated at the top of the ladder, trying to muster the courage to open the door. With a deep breath, I opened the attic door and shone my flashlight into the dimly lit space. The attic was filled with old furniture and boxes covered in dust, but there was no sign of anyone or anything unusual, until I noticed a shadowy figure crouched in the corner. My breath caught in my throat as I saw the figure, clad in the same long coat as before, silently watching me from the darkness. In a panic, I swung the baseball bat, but the figure was already moving, darting past me and down the ladder with alarming speed. I chased after them, but when I reached the bottom, the figure was gone. My house was eerily silent again, save for the thudding of my own heartbeat. I realized I needed to call the police and report the incident, but as I picked up the phone, I noticed something chilling. The front door was ajar. The police arrived shortly, but after a thorough search, they found no sign of the intruder. The figure had vanished without a trace. As I tried to explain the events, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The note's warning and the mysterious visitor left me with a gnawing sense of dread that lingered long after the police left. Even now, every time I hear a strange noise or see a shadow move, I can't help but wonder if someone, or something, is still watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again.